you probably wouldn't expect that one of the most successful luxury brands in the world started its life as a small, niche hardware shop selling vintage doorknobs. But that's exactly how Restoration Hardware began. A quirky little hardware shop which was focused on selling antique style and vintage inspired home fixtures. In the early years, the company had modest sales, just managing to scrape by. And by the early 2000s, it was losing money and fading fast. It nearly failed, before pulling off one of the boldest brand reinventions in retail history. Today, it's a nearly $4 billion per year luxury empire, known for its $10,000 couches, private jets and yachts, and flagship galleries in multiple countries. In this video, we'll be exploring the intriguing backstory and history of Restoration Hardware. We'll break down what they do, the economics of their business model, and how they've tapped into the human psyche in a way that few other brands have managed. It's a fascinating case study in the psychology of exclusivity, perception, and branding, or in this case, rebranding. So let's start from the beginning. Restoration Hardware was founded in Eureka, California in 1979 by a man named Stephen Gordon. At the time, Stephen was in the process of restoring an old 3-story Victorian home. He found that locating high quality yet affordable fixtures, fittings, and various other parts needed for the build was proving to be a challenge. He'd spend hours scouring for vendors that had these hard to find parts, and he realized quickly that other people probably had similar problems finding these parts. And given his limited budget, he often couldn't even afford the items when he found them for sale, so he had to get pretty creative. He put together a binder of photocopied images from various vendors he had found, and he scratched in prices that were double what the vendors were charging. This would serve as his first catalog. When he made a sale, he would use the profits to buy the item he needed for his project. And from the beginning, his entire marketing strategy was really straightforward. He got an inexpensive sign made which said Restoration Hardware, and he hung it on his front porch. After 6 months of operating the business out of his home, he had saved up enough cash to rent a 300 square foot warehouse in Old Town Eureka, officially taking the first real steps of his entrepreneurial journey. 5 years in, his first store was successful enough to justify keeping the business going, but not necessarily profitable enough to be comfortable. But he pushed through the struggle. By 1994, there were 5 stores operated by the business, generating roughly $4.2 million in revenue. And around this time was when Restoration Hardware would raise their first round of funding of roughly $2.5 million to use for expansion. They would continue expanding product offerings and enter the furniture category, where they would focus on offering high-quality craftsmanship and sturdy American-made furniture. But Gordon didn't really have a primary focus for the business. He often filled the store with eclectic and random whimsical products that he personally liked. Product offerings would range from dragonfly door knockers to Canadian aluminum lunchboxes. This resulted in kind of a quirky corner shop feel rather than a real curated retail environment. The assortment of varied random items attracted a lot of curious customers who could typically be talked into an impulsive purchase. And the model worked. The company grew and more experienced managers were hired, and they ended up doubling their store count every single year for the next 3 years. By 1997, they operated 41 stores with total revenues pushing $97 million for that year. But despite pretty strong revenue generation, the company only operated at a roughly 3% margin. Nevertheless, eager investors were starting to focus on how the company was going to grow. Subsequently, they scheduled more store openings, aiming to open 25 stores in 1998 and 30 stores in 1999. The strong ambitions to scale and expand excited investors, and the company started looking into public fundraising in order to grow even faster. So, in June of 1998, Restore Hardware would go public on the NASDAQ, jumping a total of 38% on the first day of trading and raising $38 million worth of new funds. But if it wasn't clear, their business model was fragile and convoluted. Because of the varied and often just random product range, they had failed to define their brand. So they were selling random items, and quite frankly, most of these items weren't products that customers truly needed. In 1998, after pretty aggressive expansion, they managed to squeeze out a pretty measly $3.8 million in profit on $211 million in gross sales. And their only profitable quarter that year was the fourth, mostly driven by gift and holiday purchases. Filling the stores with random products had initially proven to be a creative and kind of fun way to draw in foot traffic and get customers curious. But that strategy was now starting to be seen as a liability that drove brand confusion. In 1999, the small cracks that had shown up early on in the company and the brand began to expand. That year, they struggled to profit and they had to heavily rely on promotions to move unsold inventory. Another issue was the extremely aggressive growth strategy. Cash flow from operations had proved to be insufficient in order to open the 30 planned stores that year. They were now in the red, losing $3 million on almost $300 million in sales in 1999. In the year 2000, they went ahead and added 13 new stores, despite some stores turning a negative profit. At this point, investors were getting scared and bankruptcy was looking like a real possibility for the company. 2001 proved to be a radical turning point for the brand thanks to a new CEO, Gary Friedman. Before taking the helm of Restoration Hardware, Gary had built an extensive resume of retail experience. He started his career while attending community college, folding clothes at the Gap part-time. However, after having achieved a D average after his first year in college, he dropped out and fully committed himself to his job at the Gap. And over the next 2 years, his work ethic really paid off, eventually getting promoted to store manager. One day during his early tenure at the Gap, the then president of the Gap, Mickey Drexler, called an all-hands meeting in which Gary was present. During the meeting, Drexler was impressed with Gary's initiative. The next day, Gary got a request from Drexler's secretary to join a meeting with all the executives at the Gap HQ. Gary's career accelerated rapidly. He was soon promoted to district manager, then regional manager, and eventually oversaw 63 stores. A few years later, an up-and-coming retailer, Williams-Sonoma and Pottery Barn, wanted to interview Gary. To his surprise, the job they offered him was for a much higher position than he currently had at the Gap. He couldn't pass up the opportunity, so he joined Williams-Sonoma. And over the years, just like the Gap, he would work through the ranks, going from senior vice president to chief merchandising officer to president and eventually chief operating officer of Williams-Sonoma. While at Williams-Sonoma, he built a reputation as a high performer. He became known as the guy who transformed Pottery Barn from a $50 million a year tabletop accessory business to a $1 billion home furnishings brand. Despite his years of hard work and dedication to the company, Gary was shocked when he was looked over for the role of CEO in favor of an external hire, later alleging that he had been promised the position for years. Then and there, he made up his mind to leave the company and look for his next challenge. At the time, Stephen Gordon had already been in contact with Gary to take over his position as CEO in an attempt to turn around the dying Restoration Hardware. In March of 2001, after 14 years at Williams-Sonoma, Gary resigned and took over as CEO of Restoration Hardware. Restoration Hardware's stock was at an all-time low and the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. So Gary had to act fast in order to plug the holes of a sinking ship. He managed to raise $15 million from investors, $4.5 million of it being his own money, infusing the company and staving off imminent bankruptcy. His immediate prognosis of the business was poor merchandising. Including the most random selection of products conceivable may have driven some foot traffic, but led to cluttered stores, continual discounting on unsold SKUs, and the worst part, brand confusion. He began cutting out the most offensive items and focusing on higher margin products such as textiles and bath products. These small changes brought Restoration Hardware back from the brink of bankruptcy and made their first profit in 2004, 6 years after the initial IPO. Gary later stated, "It wasn't a turnaround because Restoration Hardware never really worked. They went public in 1998 and never made money. It didn't carry enough of anything to stand for anything." Before signing off on the fourth quarter 2003 earnings call, he stated the following: "We're all here for the long term. I spent 11 years at the Gap and then 14 years at Williams-Sonoma. This is going to be my last stop. So I will be here for a long time, and this will become a really great company long term." Despite Gary's ambition, the company's profitability was short-lived. In 2005, they lost $29 million US. After a brief few years in which the business somewhat worked, Restoration Hardware was taken private again. This would help avoid pressure from external investors to aggressively grow the company. In the midst of the 2008 recession, And with consumer discretionary spending plummeting, Gary would hike prices and finally put an end to the cheap discovery items that the brand had been known for. In 1998, Restoration Hardware had been targeting customers whose annual household income was $75,000 US or more. Now, they would be targeting high net worth individuals with $200,000 in income per year or more. And in order to recreate themselves, they officially rebranded from Restoration Hardware to RH. This was a time of big change for the company. During this time, they established direct relationships with their suppliers, helping to avoid any middleman markups, but also it let them work with manufacturers to scale up volume on popular products as needed. It was in 2012 that RH would finally go public again, this time on the New York Stock Exchange, re-emerging as a luxury-first lifestyle brand. No longer a small, quirky store selling trinkets that people didn't need. With the company officially rebranded and on a new track, RH swung big. Between 2013 and 2016, RH rolled out its first designer galleries. These were massive, opulent showrooms in super high-end real estate locations, such as West Hollywood, Chicago, New York City, and Atlanta. The galleries often including rooftop restaurants, wine bars, rooftop gardens, and expansive multi-floor displays. Over the years, the company invested heavily into owning more of their supply chain, as well as expanding their real estate portfolio, purchasing the properties outright. Between 2016 and 2022, the company expanded successfully, and in 2022, RH went global, opening Ano Park in the UK, an expansive countryside estate that was the first international gallery. Despite a slowdown in recent years, RH hasn't stopped, introducing RH3, their super yacht, and RH1, their G650 private jet, both available for luxury charter. In the span of 13 years between 2012 and 2025, RH evolved from a high-end furniture retailer to a vertically integrated luxury brand, blending retail, real estate, hospitality, and design into a cohesive system, driven by a CEO who many consider to have Steve Jobs' level of control and vision. The US home furnishings industry is massive. It's valued at roughly $800 billion. But it's also deeply fragmented. Most companies compete on price, promotions, and seasonal trends to drive sales. There's everything from big box stores like Wayfair and Ashley Home Furniture to DTC startups, but it's almost always a race to the bottom on price. The result is thin margins, commoditized products, and high customer churn. In an environment like this, brands need to find a way to stand out. RH positions itself as a design-first, luxury exclusive brand, prioritizing aesthetics, brand experience, and vertical integration over discounts and volume. Compared to other companies, RH doesn't open stores, it builds galleries, set in prime urban locations. You can see in this video, I traveled to my local restoration warehouse here in Manhattan, New York, just to see the scale of the building, and you can see how impressive it is. These galleries are meant to serve as a fully immersive brand experience, appealing to a tightly focused group of high net worth buyers. RH understands the aspirational psychology of the consumer very well, not just in what they buy, but why they buy what they buy. RH's brand signals subtle affluence without necessarily needing to say it outright. Minimalist architecture, subdued color palettes, and massive oversized showrooms. Exclusivity isn't implied, it's engineered into the brand. Human psychology naturally assigns higher value to things which are scarce or restricted. And RH uses this as a strategic tool to shape their brand. And they do this in a few specific ways. First is their $200 per year membership program that grants customers 25% off. This subtly creates a gated layer around the brand. And simultaneously, it also solves the customer churn issue that notoriously plagues the home furnishings industry, serving as an anchor for long-term customer retention. Secondly, they have a limited store presence, only in key cities or high-wealth zip codes, maintaining their scarcity and exclusivity. Finally, they offer experiences and products for ultra-high net worth individuals. Since going public again in 2012, RH's revenue has climbed steadily from around $1.2 billion in 2012 to around $3.7 billion in 2024. The growth wasn't driven through increased store count as Restoration Hardware had done it in the past, but it was done by increasing average order value, product quality and customer experience, and brand elevation. At its peak, RH's operating margins were 20%, which is really high in the retail space, especially furniture where margins are typically 2 to 5%. Rather than playing the volume game like most retailers, RH plays the value per transaction game, with sofas ranging from $8,000 to $15,000, $10,000 bed frames, and custom design installations for homes which can cost 6 or 7 figures. What comes next for RH is bigger, riskier, and far more transformative than anything else they've tried to date. Ano Park was just the first step in their global expansion, with plans to open galleries in Paris, Berlin, and key Asian cities. Aside from gallery expansion, their next big project is RH Residences. With Residences, the company now plans to design and sell turnkey luxury homes, arriving fully furnished and styled. For the brand, it's a natural evolution, resulting in even more vertical integration and increasing average transaction size. Gary has been credited with the success of the company, stating in multiple shareholder letters that the ambition is to build a brand like Apple, vertically integrated, aspirational, and controlling the entire user experience. Looking forward, the big question is, can RH scale this luxury ecosystem globally? It's a bold strategy with some serious challenges. Luxury housing development is slowing down in key markets around the world, and cost of construction and materials are at an all-time high. Expansion into new markets and business ventures could stretch the brand thin. It's a business with massive operating costs, and RH's next chapter could cement the brand as one of the most ambitious lifestyle luxury brands, or expose the limits of lifestyle brand demand. Restoration Hardware's journey is extensive, full of highs and lows, and tells a compelling story. From a small antique hardware store born out of a renovation project to an almost unrecognizable luxury brand that's worth $10 billion. RH has built a lifestyle brand that almost no one's going to be able to replicate. It's a lesson in brand control, reinvention, and long-term strategy. It's a rare case of a company niching down, managing to grow, and eventually defining itself within a highly competitive category. Where most retailers race to the bottom in price wars, RH did the opposite and played the long game, building slower, bigger, and more exclusively. Thank you for watching Heavy Signal. My name is Nick. I really hope you enjoyed the video. I had a lot of fun researching and making it. Make sure to subscribe and let me know what company or business topic you want me to break down in the next video.